Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of Elite FTS for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it. Now, onto the show.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real.
We are live. Put it in a gym bag, load weights on it. Elite FTS has it. Now, onto the show.
We are live. I don't see me, but we're live. I think, can you all hear me? Is there a delay on this?
There may be, yes.
Because I'm seeing the intro right now.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a delay.
But it looks like it's in super slow-mo.
Well, that is odd. I will have to look into that.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Test, test, test. All right, hear me out. Nope, that's not.
You're probably going to have to turn down your volume on the iPad.
Okay, so I'm going to move forward as I'm being heard and kind of go from there. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself, right? So that's what we have. So today is episode number what?
88.
88. So the double eights. And I'm rolling solo. Sam is out of town. Looks like there's, I don't want to try not to look at that because I think that delay is going to mess my head up. What I'm going to do is I have a couple topics that I'm going to talk about. Then I'm going to take questions through the different chats that we have going on. There's a super chat right now going on YouTube. Then I'll be looking at, there are questions that I did a shout out or a post out or a comment out, whatever you want to call it, on Instagram. So there's some questions on there. There's also a question block that I put on our YouTube community. So I'm going to be pulling from all those different areas to answer questions and just kind of see what's going on. So quick administrative stuff to get out of the way. We did our most recent limited edition apparel drop yesterday. The FU hood that I have on right now is part of that drop. Zero hood is on there. MFPR, or Train Your Ass Off t-shirt, is on there. I think those are the only items that are on there. Oh, and if you spend $69, you get a free hat. So again, those are limited items. So when they're gone, they're gone. Based upon past performance, I expect the FU hood to probably be gone before the end of the day. The other two, we'll kind of see how that plays out. So that's my admin, you know, that I'm running solo without Sam giving me the prompts and all the kind of stuff to kind of go from there. So I'm seeing the messages now that people are hearing me. So we're good with that. The first question I was going to jump in on was a question through the Elite FTS Instagram, which was Meathead tips for an expecting father, which grabbed my attention because it's a little bit different than many of the other questions that I get. Tips. I mean, fatherhood tips are always going to be a weird thing because there's a lot associated with that, but it's because you said Meathead tips, I'm going to put that in there. And I believe the context of the question, if I'm thinking back to it, was the person did work at home, which does help with one of the biggest tips that I have, but everything's circumstantial, which makes a lot of these things hard to answer. When it comes to when I was, what do you call it, early father, when I was expecting father, I don't know what the hell. The one thing that was the most important to me wasn't quality time. It was quantity time. And that I don't regret that decision because I was there for just about everything. And when one of my children is on the spectrum, that makes it a little bit more important. I don't know the words I'm really kind of searching for here, but when one of my children was not very verbal, I wanted to be there when he was verbal. So the whole, for me, the whole quality time thing just didn't work in my brain that well, because how do you determine that? Especially when you're dealing with other people. So the tip that I would have is to do whatever you can do to be there as much as you possibly can, because then you're going to be involved in more organic discussions, if you want to say that is what you have with your kids, but in more organic settings, and then trying to have staged settings for things like that. So that would be the first thing. Is with, I kind of approached it the same way that I did training. I would put training first in my schedule, then everything else kind of build around that. This was the same thing. So that where I was going to work played into this. What times I was going to work was going to play into this. And this was a situation to where having my own company played to an advantage here, because even with the company being much smaller than it is now, the most important thing to me was to have the freedom to be able to work from wherever I wanted to work from. So that allowed that. But at the same time, the trade-off with that is you're going to work a extreme amount of hours to be able to have that trade-off. So that would be my biggest tip there, is just, it's so simple, right? It's to just be there. But when you will speak to other people, other fathers, parents, and so forth, that are giving you tips, they're going to give you advice. Remember that all of them are coming from their own bias, their own circumstance, their own regrets per se, and their own successes. But your relationship is going to be your relationship based upon what you think's right for you. So that would be the first question, I suppose, to be able to go from. There's super chats coming in. See if I can grab one of these really quick. There's actually not a single question in it. So back out of there, go here, go here. All right. If you struggle in the middle of a bench press and it is not the technique, what breaks down? What exercises are best to implement in your bench workout? It is the technique that gets broken down by max effort. Are there any exercises to be able to do? Is this the place for strength work? All right. So the question, I'm going to look at this a couple different ways. The question is, if your bench press breaks down in the middle, what's the cause of that if it's not technically related? This is where I always kind of default back to, all sticking points are going to be physical, mental, or technical. And everybody wants this question here. I pulled from the Instagram feed is, what it validates exactly what I'm saying. Everybody wants to know what exercise to do, but they don't want to know what to actually do to fix the issue. So to answer the question, if you're missing halfway, then what I would need to know is, when it hits that halfway point, what happens next? Does it go completely straight down? Does it start to drift back towards your face? What's going on? Because if it just falls back down, it can be a time under tension issue. You're not able to strain for the period of time to that exceeded, which caused that mini max to occur. you went into that mini max sticking point, whatever you want to call that, too slow, which could be another thing. It could also be that your shoulders are not allowing you to be able to keep the bar path in the line that you're trying to push it in. So if you're trying to push in a straight line, the shoulders are not helping to stabilize that straight line. So it's drifting back a little bit. If you do drift back and you kind of like elbow, use a J pattern to push, then your shoulders are not stable enough to keep it into that J pattern to be able to push as well. So yes, it could be shoulders, but it could also be speed. It could also be the time under tension. Can also be that your triceps just gas out at that point. So there's a lot of things with that to where I'm still going to default back to it and say what's going on technique wise when this happens as well. Because let's assume that the bar does hit that sticking point, that mini max, then it starts drifting back towards your face. Is it drifting back towards your face because the shoulders or the lats or whatever can't keep it stabilized to be able to push through there? Or is it pushing back towards your face because you have a slight technical breakdown right off of your chest, which causes your elbows to be a little bit too far in front of the bar? So then that becomes that technical thing with that. So what are the exercises becomes this issue, because you're assuming that the exercise is going to be programmed based upon an adequate strength to get through this midpoint. So that inadequate strength to get through the midpoint could be, I'll give you some examples. It could be corrected with just isometric work, working within that range. That's one way. Assuming that your yielding strength isn't strong enough to be able to keep everything in line to be able to push through there, which yielding strength is going to be different than the dynamic strength of how fast that you're going to go into it. So an exercise for yielding strength is going to be much different than an exercise for dynamic strength. So if it's a yielding strength issue, you would be talking about things like isometric pin pulls. You could be talking about different yielding positions in a bench press, different yielding positions in, say, a barbell push-up, different things like that that are going to work the pause, the yielding, or even that isometric function. So all those movements, say pushing against pins being one of them, or midpoint holds with a slight decline barbell press. Completely different exercise than if it was a dynamic issue that may be able to be addressed with dynamic med ball throws, or speed bench presses, or dumbbell speed bench presses. So rather than, you see, I hope people are kind of seeing where I'm going here. Rather than going for what exercise needs to be done, think a little bit deeper in regards to what is the strength component that's being tested or maxed, and then what exercise best fits that strength component that needs to be addressed, and then how will that exercise best be trained? Would it be more from the eccentric motion, the concentric motion, the isometric motion? How best to kind of work around that? Which I understand, this seems like I'm taking a very simple thing to where somebody wants an answer, like just do 2 board presses for 5 sets of 5 after your main bench work, and you'll be good. It's more than that. That's without getting into any of the mental aspects. So there's also the mental aspect of the midpoint here. Usually also happens with, I see it a lot with midpoint or midpoint through lockout, where if I was to engage this person in a conversation for a while, I may hear things like my bench press always stalls here. So my reply to that would be always is the question. Does it always stall there? Usually the first answer is going to be yes. And I'm going to say, so how do you get your warm-ups done? If it always stalls there, how do you do the bar? How do you do 95 pounds? How do you do any of your warm-ups if it always stalls? Well, it doesn't always stall there. It only always stalls there when I miss. Okay? So 99% of the time, it doesn't stall there. So what I'm trying to get at here is when the inner dialogue is, I always miss here. And then you get up to a weight that's heavy enough to create that situation to happen. You've already programmed yourself to the point where this is always going to happen. So that needs to be addressed and worked on as well. So when it comes to mini maxes or sticking points like this, what I try to compel everybody to think of is when you look to address the problem, address it from the technical standpoint, the physical standpoint, and the mental standpoint, because there's nothing that says you can't address it from all three at the same time. When you go that route, you're going to cover all your bases. So I kind of hope that answers that one. Go back here to YouTube, see if there's any super chats in there. And there's not. Is that even still going on?
It should be. Give me 1 second.
Okay. I have another topic on my agenda that I'm going to wait until 1:30 to be able to answer. Actually, probably 1:35, because it's going to be an ongoing conversation that I'm having with Brian Carroll. That's a very interesting topic. So I'm looking for another question. Do you see anything that I don't see?
Give me 1 sec. I just wanted to tell you we are still live on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I'm a layman, supplemental work on speed versus max effort days. Do you stick with the same movement and work it twice, or do you do two different movements, etc.?
Okay, that's a good question. So the question is, supplemental exercises on max effort and speed day, should they be the same or should they change? And the follow-up question to that would be, how long should the exercises stay in there? So to make sure that we're on the same page, I'm going to step back real quick and just redefine what I see as a supplemental movement. Primary movement, and for me, primary movement in a conjugate program, strength and conditioning program, really doesn't matter. It's going to be whatever the first main movement is. So that first main movement could happen first, or it could happen after warm-ups. The main movement is what that is. So this isn't what this question is about. The question would be about the supplemental exercise. That would be next on the list proceeding through the training session. So as I would see that, it would be the second most important, or also the second highest energy demand, or the second hardest to be able to recover from. Usually those exercises are going to be trained heavier in a so I'm going to broaden it, say 3 to 8 rep range. And they're going to be trained harder. So because they are supplemental exercises, they're going to have to rotate more frequently than what you might find a bottom program accessory movement. That being something like a dumbbell side raise at the end of a upper body day, which is here nor there. Those have their purpose. They have their reason to be in the program. They probably don't need to shift and change a whole lot. So with the supplemental exercises, there's no golden rule. So you can, if the exercise really works for you, you can keep in the same exercise with very modest variations for longer periods of time. So for instance, let's say you want to do a partial range, close grip bench of some kind. It could be, 2 board for a few sessions, a 3 board for a few sessions. It could be a floor press for a few sessions. So you're still changing it, but it's still by definition a mid-range tricep exercise per se. What I'm going to put out there is, because one of the major goals in my mind of Conjugate is to figure out what works for you, is you have to keep an exercise in long enough to see if you're going to gain any benefit from it. Even if that benefit's just simply liking to do it, you need to keep it in long enough for that, but not so long that it's going to end up tapping into your recovery demands. The reason I'm saying this is if you do keep the same exercise in there for 2 months, I see that as, that's great if it's helping to build what you want to build. But I also see that as a huge lost opportunity, because what if it doesn't build what you want to build? And then you got to switch it after a couple months. In that same 3-month period of time, you could have rotated through 3, 4, maybe in 5 different supplemental exercises. And out of those 5, you still may only find 1 or 2 that really help. And you also may find a few that you just can't do for whatever reason. Pain, discomfort, whatnot. So to give a concrete answer, I like to see things, if I'm going to put it in there, anywhere between, this is another broad thing, 1 and 5 times. The more advanced the lifter is, the more frequent that movement would need to change, because it's going to be harder for them to keep getting the most out of the movement. For instance, a more advanced lifter might be able to do that supplemental exercise on Monday and then again on Thursday. And then that next Monday, they're not going to be able to increase the weight. They're not going to be able to increase the reps. So they're not going to be able to get better at it. So they should change it, every 2 times. Now, the follow-up to that would be, if it's upper body, should the same supplemental exercise be done twice a week or once a week? So on the dynamic and max effort day, should that same supplemental exercise be used? It can. So if you stick with a rule of, say, 3 to 5 times, then keep it that rule. So if it's 3 times, it can be 3 times if it's only done on max effort day. So if Monday is your max effort lower body day, it can be done, next Monday, the Monday after that, then you rotate out. So there's 3 times. Or it can be done Monday on the max effort day, Thursday on this dynamic effort day, and then Monday on the next max effort day, and then rotate it back out again. That seems to be mostly beneficial for everybody, to be able to rotate in that sequence. That way they're able to either push the reps or push the weight each time they do that. There are other ways to be able to push the effort of a supplemental movement that you're doing. I prefer that they stay weight or reps for the supplemental, so it's all really, really heavy, strength-oriented type training, and then save some of the other intensification methods for the lower supplementals or accessory type training that goes in there. Do you have another one or any other ones come in?
Not super chats, but I do have a couple other questions.
All right, cool.
While going heavy, 95 plus on Sumo deadlift using mixed grip, my right hand opens up on my thigh. Any tricks to help with this?
I assume that the right hand is the overhand, because if it's the underhand, if it's the overhand grip, then a lot of the times the fingers are going to rip open on the thighs you're pulling it up. Any tips on this? Sure. I mean, that's what baby powder's for. I mean, there's those hacks or whatever you want to call. The baby powder is one, water's another. You got to look at what's legal and not legal in the federation that you're lifting in. Moving your grip out can also help. changing your stance can also help. So you want to try to keep your palm in grip, hand, whatever you want to call that, away from the thigh as much as you can. For that reason, because as you're pulling back, those fingers can get caught on the leg and start to pull open a little bit. That's how I would address it first. I would address it with either the stance, grip, look at that first, go with that. If that's not possible to change in any way, and I don't know if I've ever seen that to be the case, but if that's not possible to change in any other way, then I would look towards baby powder and stuff like that. But I assume that this person's probably already done that. Okay, so Brian Carroll is going to deadlift all of us in chat. Okay, we got a beater car.
Yep.
What's that one?
In your opinion, which form of powerlifting leads to more injuries long term, raw, multiply, or single ply? Please be unbiased.
Yeah, okay. That's going to lead into what I'm going to talk about later, is how the fuck to not be biased on certain things. I don't think, I'm trying to take the advice here and to remove all my bias from this, because I see the debates. They're not even debates. I see the arguments on each side. A debate's actually two people actually trying to prove a point. What I typically see in these conversations is just an argument with one troll trying to make another troll look stupid while both trolls look stupid themselves. The old context would have been Raw hasn't been around long enough to be able to know, which I don't believe that can no longer be in a reasonable out as far as expectations go. The problem is when comparing this is you're going to look at longevity, and the problem with looking at longevity in a sport such as powerlifting is what they call it, churn rate, like a turnover rate. The turnover rate, I think they call that churn. I don't know. I'm an idiot sometimes. And the turnover rate in the sport is extremely high. This is me being unbiased here. Being biased and being somebody that's been a part of the sport in one way or another for decades, and other people who are a part of the sport now, you don't see things the same way, because when you're a part of the sport and you're ingrained in the sport, you're going to build relationships with the sport, with other people who truly love the sport. So your bias, regardless of the type of equipment somebody uses, it's ingrained in that conversation because you're speaking with other people who they're in it for the long haul, no matter what, for whatever their reason is. So when you remove those people from the conversation and just look at stats, you'll see that a very large percentage of people who compete overall in the sport of powerlifting for longer than a year is very low. So what you see what I'm saying, this becomes a very diluted, hard conversation, because do we exclude those people, right? Because injury rate is, for a sport, should include all people that participate in that sport from beginners to advanced. So now if you exclude 90% of those people and you're only going to look at the top 10%, so you see where I'm going now. So now you're only going to look at the top 10% of single ply, multi-ply, and raw. Would it not come to be a reasonable expectation to think that anybody that's in the top 10% of any sport that they're a part of is going to have a higher injury rate when compared to somebody that's part of a sport that's only been part of the sport for a year and a half, or any other? I think people know where I'm going here. It would be like looking at the injury rate of football players, biased. So looking at the injury rate of football players, but then only looking at those that play in the NFL and not looking at any of the others. And then trying to make a recommendation of, well, is the injury rate here higher than here, or here? What I'm trying to say is, I don't think that the injury rates are per se associated with the gear, be it multi-ply, unlimited, single ply, sleeves, wraps, and so forth. The injury rates occur for a multitude of different reasons, where I would probably biasly put overreaching is one of the highest reasons for that. And by overreaching, yes, I kind of mean overreaching as far as training goes, pushing the training a little bit too far, not backing off as much as they should back off. But then that, kind of ducktails back into, how do they know when to back off if they haven't done too much to know when to back off? So I hope that answers the question. I think that with that, what happens with that is it's kind of a smokescreen for the bigger conversation is why basically what it is, it's, in short, it's a dick measuring contest. So you're going to have the multi-ply crowd saying, well, we do this because it's, we can do it for longer and there's less injuries. And then you're going to hear the same thing on the other side. They're just pounding their chest for what style of training that they are competing, that they believe in the most. You're never going to see anybody that competes in one style of training say, yeah, my style of training sucks, or my style of competing, I should say, sucks. You're not going to see that. What I think needs to be looked at is forget all that kind of stuff and just look at what are these movement patterns that are being competed in, and then what is the repetitive nature of those movement patterns over an extended period of time, training at high intensities and high volumes at very large thresholds, and kind of go from there. That was a long answer for...
Noah Katz, he sent in a super chat earlier.
Yeah.
He has a question. Do you think that waving intensity or the actual compensatory acceleration training is the biggest factor in the effectiveness of the dynamic effort method in a conjugate program?
Waving the intensity, or what was the second part?
Sorry, there's a lot of big words that I don't know. Do you think that the waving intensity or the actual compensatory acceleration training is the biggest factor in the effectiveness?
The compensatory acceleration training, unless it's a circumax. So let me back that up a little bit. Your muscles don't know the weight that's on the bar. They know speed, right? They know force. So if that is being waved over a 3-week period of time, and the intensity will differ 5 to 10% per week for the 3 weeks. Yes, there's going to be accumulated fatigue, but that accumulated fatigue would probably happen even if the weight was still going to be the same. I don't want to downplay the importance of waving intensities. It definitely plays a role. But when you're talking about dynamic effort training, you're also true dynamic effort training, as I would see that, which is focusing on the technical aspect and the compensatory acceleration. That type of dynamic effort training can't become too heavy, because then the your ability to flex into the bar or to use the compensatory acceleration, try to move the bar as fast as you can, is going to decrease the higher the intensity comes. So with that in mind, that trying to move the bar as fast as you can possibly move it, in my opinion, is after technique is the most important component of the dynamic effort training, because it's easy to say all sets, all reps should be done as fast as you possibly can. And outside of like really light warm-up reps, that's 100% true. That has its case. But to be able to do it with intent is a skill, and it's an acquired skill that if you watch somebody that's very explosive, because there's a genetic component that plays into this too, and people who have been training dynamically for an extended period of time, you're going to see that the way that they can come off of the bottom of a squat or a box squat or a bench is definitely going to look different and more explosive than those that don't. Now, that's not to say those that don't are not using compensatory acceleration. They are, but there is a certain percentage variance to where that can be optimized. So when I'm asked, how do you determine what your 3-week dynamic effort cycle should be? What should the percents be? Because there's a lot of confusion, because there's a lot of different people saying a lot of different percents. My advice to that is forget those people. Just take a bench press or take your squat or whatever you want to dynamically train, and to film the sets of 2 or 3 repetitions and start and look at each set from 40% and then jump 5% each set. So 40% set 1, 45 set 2, 50 set 3, progressively work up over a period of time. What you're going to see is when the weight's too light, say it's a bench press, the weight's too light, it's going to feel like you're hyperextending your elbows, your back's coming off of the bench, and it's just, when the weight starts to become in that zone that we're talking about, things are going to start to feel tight. They're going to start moving fast. Technique's going to feel on point. Things are going to feel really good. At a certain point, the weight intensity is going to get heavy, that bar speed's then going to slow down, and it's not going to feel like you can do it with the same intent. So as we're talking about compensatory acceleration, I want to throw in the word intent, with the intent to move the weight as fast as possible. Because what happens in your brain is once you get over a certain percentage or a certain intensity, say it's 80% for some people, 70%, 85%, whatever it is, that intent will begin to change because the weight's fucking heavy. So you're not going to be thinking, okay, I need to move this as fast as I possibly can, because that intent is a little different. By getting more repetitions done with that compensatory acceleration intent is going to ingrain that dynamic component more so than not. So to answer the question, the intent of how the bar moves to me is going to be more important than the intensity. But when I first started answering the question, I also said outside of a circumax phase, where the circumax phase is going to involve, loading more bands, chains, whatever you have to be able to get that top percentage of the barbell closer to a 90% or more, 100% in many cases, sometimes even higher than that at the top. Yes, that intent is still going to be there, and it should be there, but it's not the same because the bar speed is going to be slower. So you're using the accommodating resistance to kind of interchange or take the place of that intent, because you're relying on the bands to be able to create that intent coming out of the bottom with that. So that's that one. So I think, all right, I think I saw.
Yeah, Uncertainly, sorry if I mispronounced your name. He didn't have a question, but he did. He said that he's going to include technical work with a PVC pipe for the main lifts as feeder workouts for himself and his friends. Cheers and thanks for the idea. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you. All right, so the other topic I have, which came as a voicemail to me from Brian Carroll, who will come out sometime in the next year to be able to do another podcast. He's just kind of throwing ideas around, and he hit me with a question a few days ago that dealt with, how do I even explain what the question was? The aftermath of athletics. So basically, a retired washed up meathead or a retired NFL player or anybody that does anything to an extreme. And then once that time's over and then they're older, they're in a different chapter of their life, then they begin to look back on what they did. The one example that was presented was, an NFL player saying to a doctor that they wish they never would have played, just with the state that they're in now. Say it's 20 years post-career, 15 years post-career, or, washed up meathead like myself that has a slew of injuries that's accumulated over the year. So when you look back, how do you look back? Then obviously there's Ronnie Coleman that says he's got no regrets except he should have lifted more weight. But there's a big there's a big discussion that kind of goes on with this, because it's hard to remove the bias. So this is I couldn't answer the question via text, and Brian and I are going to have to expand on it when he comes up in February to be able to go a little bit deeper in different angles. But what I see from this, and a lot of my friends are washed up meatheads that are paying the price for, what they've done. And I've had some people that have said that they wish they never would have done it. They're never going to have their kids do it. If it's with powerlifting, I also had people that were, played football, say the same thing. And I think it's a bit short-sighted, because to take the example of, say, an NFL player that lives with pain every day because of the 10 years that they played in the NFL, thinking back and telling a physician or a doctor or whatever it is, I wish I never would have played, then I wouldn't be in the state that I'm in right now. I get that, and I can understand that. But I wonder, because the stories are typically going to be told by the practitioner that spoke with the athlete or somebody else that knows this athlete or whatever it's going to be. And it's a snapshot in time of where they are now, to where I wonder if during the prime of this athlete's career, what would their sport medicine doctor, coach say about them at the time? What would they say at the time? Because when you're removed from that moment, you forget what that moment was and how much work went into that moment. So where am I trying to go here? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is there's context to every chapter, of somebody's life. And when you're looking at that, I'll just use me as an example. I can't look at the 30 years or whatever I did competing of powerlifting and say, this was the greatest thing in the whole world, and just leave it at that, because there's lots of ways for me to look back. I can look back and say, I never thought I reached my full potential. I certainly don't have the all-time world records or the world records to be able to validate, the damage that's been done. So I can look back and be bitter, about a lot of different things and a lot of the different choices that I made. And there are some choices that I made that I do regret. I can look back on that and say, man, I wish that never would have fucking happened. But to do that is living in a fucking vacuum, because to do that and then exclude from the conversation that I've loved to train my entire life. And even growing up, probably nobody thought I would ever be able to do anything with this training shit for the rest of my life. It's like, you got to find something else to do. You can't make a career out of this. You got to find something else to do that's just going to beat you up. You got to find something. Everybody was saying that. So thus I pressed on, because it's what I love to do. And because that's what I love to do, I'm sitting today behind a table doing a table talk, talking about training and how it helped enhance my life and how it helps other people's lives. So to sit there and say that, yeah, I'm fucked up. Yeah, I got replaced hips. I got this. I wish I never would have done that. I wish I never would. What I'm kind of saying is, and if I was to advise somebody to not do that same thing, would be a huge disservice, because there's good and bad to everything. There's yin and yang to everything. And so for me to throw that out there and say, man, I wish I never would have done that, because if I never would have done that, maybe I wouldn't have replaced hips right now. Maybe I'd be able to change a light bulb with my right shoulder. Maybe I wouldn't have the pain that I have. Maybe I wouldn't have, but that's short-sighted, because maybe I wouldn't have the wife I have right now. Maybe I wouldn't have the kids I have right now. Maybe I wouldn't have the friends I have right now. Maybe I wouldn't have the business I have right now. Maybe I'd be dead. Who's to say that the choices that somebody makes, that they end up paying for down the line with wear, tear, or regret, was the wrong path, when you don't know what the other path could have been? Who's to say that this quote unquote wrong path didn't play more into the pros of your life than the cons? Going back to other sports, who's to say that that NFL player who wished that they never played, what was their other path? Had they not? Where did their friends end up? Their childhood friends, their high school friends. Where they at? How did they end up? Where they at? Where's he at? So you can't look at these things in a bubble, right? Because we can't go back and change it anyhow. So that doesn't mean anything, but I understand where the conversation can go and how deep and vast it can become, because by all means, you want to figure out how to mitigate as much as you possibly can. But I'm going to be the first person to go out on a limb here and say, if you try to mitigate everything in your journey of trying to achieve whatever your dream is or whatever your path is, good fucking luck falling off the cliff. Because you're not going to get it. If you try to remove all risk from whatever path you're trying to go down, you may as well just pull up a chair and sit down, because you're not going to fucking go anywhere. Risk is part of that. So do we understand what those are when we're younger? Probably not. Do we understand what they are when we're older? Yeah, and here's my point. But we forget what it was like to be younger. And that's the biggest factor with all this, because to be young, hungry, and driving after and chasing after your dreams is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I can reverse this whole thing and say, why is it that so many people that end up retired from sport, albeit in their 40s, 45s, whatever it's going to be. Why is it that as soon as they retire from their sport, they don't have another dream that they pick up that they're just as passionate about? Why is it they just rest on their laurels and say, you know what, I wish I wouldn't have done that? Why don't they reignite that passion and drive into something else and be able to move forward with that? Because I think if they did that, then it changes the context of the conversation a little bit, where I think that, and I'm going to make this my own, I'm going to take responsibility for my own opinion and say it's my own opinion. I think right now, you know, in sport, when people are, you know, in pursuit of their passions and dreams and everything else, this shit, people are over fucking mitigating everything. Take a fucking risk and understand that there's going to be consequences to the risk that you have to take. If you want to live on shallow ground, you know, and never, that's probably the wrong term here, but I mean, to live so mitigated and so in fear of injury and failure and adversity isn't living. You know, it's just sitting stagnant. And somewhere along the line, even in the sport training, powerlifting, strength field capacity, somewhere along the line, we got so fucking inundated with trying to mitigate so much shit that we forgot what it was like to put your fucking balls on the wall and fucking go after something. And I understand that it's important to mitigate those risks, but damn it, people are mitigating risks that aren't even part of the process that they're fucking doing. It's if you're going to try to mitigate the risk of every joint and every body part you have as a powerlifting moving forward, or powerlifter trying to move forward, where you're going to have to go against the grain and you're going to have to push your body to levels that it's not used to being pushed to, and you're going to try to mitigate the risk of every joint, when the fuck are you going to train? And when are you going to get stronger? And when are you going to have the ability to develop the mindset that says, fuck it, I'm doing it anyhow? You know, because that's part of it. Because if you always have to wait for the perfect time, the perfect training cycle, the perfect metrics on your fucking aura ring or whatever, if you have to always wait for the perfect situation, you're not going to do shit. You know, and there's one, so take all those people that we're talking about, there's one commonality. Once you remove them from the practitioner's table, you remove them from the doctor's office, you remove them from that conversation, you remove them from that environment, remove them and put them in that environment of their peers that did the same thing, that chased the same thing, that went after the same thing that they did. Leave them in a room and just be a little bird on a wall and listen. And then once that conversation's over, compare that to the conversation that they had with that practitioner when they said, man, I wish I never would have done this. And you tell me what's truly in that person's heart, and I'll tell you what the real answer to this is. I'm just rambling, but I'll let Brian and I will, because there's so many ways you can go with this, because there's no right or wrong answer, as Brian just texted me earlier. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just the answer that's going to be for that person. But it's so fucking hard to go back and try to think of decisions that you made 20 or 30 years ago than what your knowledge was when you made that decision. The assumption is that everybody that took a risk 20, 30 years ago for whatever sport they were in, or even if it was a business or anything that they go all into, the assumption is when those decisions were made, they were made of ignorance. I don't believe that to be true. I do believe with age comes wisdom. So it may change some of that But I think the real wisdom is going to be able to look back and say, yeah, this decision was made to the best of my ability. I understood what the consequences could be. I never thought they would happen to me, but I wouldn't have moved forward doing it had I thought I was exempt. Is that right? From all that. In other words, at some level, a decision was made to be able to venture on whatever journey the athlete or person was going down that was thought about. Because there's defining moments in everybody's career, if it's a strength athlete or any other athlete, to where the further they go, the more these moments are going to be. But I call them, quit or push on. There's those moments where you think, well, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm done. And then there's always, for most, there's always some type of comeback. There was a choice that was made there that most people aren't going to want to talk about what went through their inner dialogue or why they chose to be able to do what they chose to do. But when that decision was being made, they were weighing that out. They're weighing out, look, I may pay for this 30 years down the line, 20 years down the line, and so forth. But so it wasn't made in complete ignorance. It was made and it was thought out. The only other factor I want to throw out there is when decisions like that are made, I've been told sometimes, and I've been told that this can be reckless because they don't understand the consequences of their decisions that could be in 25 to 30 years, where my reply to that is, and this is just being a dickhead, being back, or just to have something to say back. Well, how do you know that they're even going to live longer than 3 more years? So wouldn't the consequence of their decision over the next couple of years be more important than the consequences of the decisions for the 18 years or 20 years that they're not even going to fucking be here? So you can just do the best that you can do and kind of move forward with that. But to be in a position to circle completely back on this, to be in a position to where all you do is to sit and look back on what you did 20, 30 years later, regretting the fact that you even went down the path, is what I have a problem with. Because that's discounting what I don't even, I'm at law. I don't even know what to say. I'm kind of like at a loss for words with that, to where all I can think is it's a very shallow based thinking that's not looking at the total context of everything, because the alternative may not have been better. And that's the false, what am I looking for? That is the false perception that's being presented, is that the alternative would have been better. What I'm saying is that could be bullshit. The alternative could have been way worse. And in a lot of cases, the alternative is way worse. So you got to put that into consideration as well. All right, I kind of went off on that one a little bit, but this conversation will be continued with different people's perspective next year. Okay, so did I miss anything when I was coming through there?
Yeah, we had a couple of them here. One sec, let me scroll up. So Alex Gorissy, strength can be powered by technique, neural, and architectural adaptations. So you could have the same muscle size and don't need to put on muscle. So how do you know when it's time to add size to break a plateau? I think that's really what it boils down to.
Well, what he's saying is true. There's a context that's going through my head now that weight classes are kind of what is spinning into my head, but I don't even know if this person is a competitor or if this is a competitor type question. So the reason I think a lot when people ask me these questions. So instead of just like looking like an idiot staring off into space, I'm trying to explain what's going on in my head. if there's weight classes that come into play, then this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation, because that becomes more along the lines of, if you're going to move up a weight class, what's going to have to be the return on strength to be able to move up in that weight class to stay as competitive, or optimally more competitive than you are currently, which could change that. So let's assume that that's not even part of this discussion. Then I think you want to address all of it at the same time. That's where my conjugate bias comes in. I think you do want to be able to address all types of muscle tension that's going to accumulate strength, which would be, the dynamic effort method, the repetition method, and the max effort method. So the max effort method, the dynamic method get discussed a lot. What kind of gets lost in the conversation is the repetition method, because that's just kind of what you do with all the other kind of shit. But the reasoning for that is conditioning based, for one. Second is, to build muscle mass, to build the hypertrophy. So that has to be kind of part of the equation. And I think it can be built into the programming, at all phases throughout the training. But I'm also a believer that if it's a post-peak phase, it's a good time to drive that type of adaptation higher. So the volume can go higher. So in other words, say it's after a meet, I'm a proponent of taking a barbell off somebody's back, taking it off their hands, doing more bodybuilding type work, keeping the reps between 8 to 12, staying away from failure, increasing volume slowly over a period of time, and just kind of working on the conditioning, and then let that kind of mold into more hypertrophy type stuff with stronger type challenge sets towards the end. Use that time period, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, to put back on some of the muscle that could have been lost during a peak phase, as well as hopefully put new muscle on as well. So I see it being part of the whole developmental plan, or the annual plan, for any athlete that's moving forward. Now, if they have a lot of muscle to put on, I could also see strength becoming a secondary component to the hypertrophy type training. So to simplify the discussion a little bit, I can see where bodybuilding would pretty much be the primary means of their training for an extended period of time, 3, 6, maybe even 9 months. And we're talking somebody that's got to they're a rail. They got to put a lot of muscle on. They got to put a lot of weight on. They're going to gain fat with the muscle. It's not going to be so much of a lean bulk. It's going to be a little bit of a dirty bulk, but I'm not saying you need to put on 90 pounds either. It's going to, that for beginners, sometimes for intermediates, I think can play a huge role, just because it removes a lot of the other strength training stimulus, the heavier work, the explosive work, and it allows you to drive volume. To me, I believe volume, I don't completely believe this, but I believe volume is the best way to build hypertrophy. The reason why I don't completely believe that is I do think that, HIIT training, dog crap training, lower volume type training can be extremely beneficial for hypertrophy as well. But in general, focusing just on hypertrophy, if it's a beginner or intermediate for an extended period of time, can pay off huge in the long run, because it could be easier for them to put on. I'm not going to say they're going to put on 15 or 20 pounds of lean body weight. I'm not saying that. And that's totally not going to be the case. But for them to be able to put on 15 to 20 pounds, say half of its lean body weight in 1 year, can make a huge difference on the ability to display strength when they go into their next training cycle. I think a lot of beginners do themselves a little bit of a disservice because they stay 100% on strength-based cycling, this 12 weeks, this 12 weeks, this 12 weeks, without ever devoting a long enough period of time for straight muscle hypertrophy being done in a calorie surplus. So I hope that kind of answers the question there. What else do we got? I can go to the Instagram here too.
Not getting too many questions on the Instagram. It's just a lot of people just saying hi, I think.
Well, is it Instagram or is it the Instagram feed post?
It's an Instagram live.
All right. I made a feed post.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. And where to go? That's not what I want to see. Ain't that some shit? All right, somebody on the super chats on. Oh, look, here I'm live on Instagram. Look at my, holy fuck, am I fat? Holy cow, look at my head. I got a hog head. Holy shit. Okay, I'm on the Instagram thing now. So.
There's about a 13-second delay there.
Yeah. Somebody click a heart or do some shit so I can see. Anyhow, I'm not looking at that anymore. I'm done. Okay. I'm going to the questions. Okay, so, all right, you said you will have competitors post-meet. Okay, Dave, you said you would have competitors post-meet, take an 8-week break from lifting with the barbell. Could someone do this every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on off-season, and make it a 1-week break? I don't think 1 week's going to be long enough. Here's the, let me reframe the question. It's Jack Alpesa. I don't want to put my glasses on. Anyhow, he's asking about the 8-week break that I just mentioned that I'll request or ask competitors to do after they do at meet. So first off, that's going to change based upon if they're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Advanced, I'm going to want to have a longer break. This is something I've been doing for a very long time. And I don't know where it originally came from. I know before I came to Westside, I used to take 4 weeks and do nothing after a meet, 0. And then we get into a bodybuilding phase, then slowly come back into that. So I think some kind of comes from that. The other comes from just, I think it was a group that I had at the S2 compound that did a meet, and then the next meet wasn't for a long time away. 8 months. I mean, it was a long time away. So, and they were beat up. So I kind of came up with that then, but it wasn't for the reasons that I use now. What I was trying to have happen then, where there were some ingrained technical issues that a couple of them had that we were trying to work out and trying to change and not having any success with it. And I think it was because it's just one meet after another meet after another meet. So there wasn't any time to really focus on that. So my thought process was, if I get them away from the 3 main lifts for a very long period of time for them, then maybe, hopefully, they'll forget how to do them. And then if they forget how to do them, I can teach them how to do them the way that's going to be more optimal for them. That was my thought process. That, by the way, didn't work, but that was my thought process behind it. Then what I found out was they were able to put back on muscle mass that they lost during the peak phase really quick. They were able to bring up the conditioning very, very quick. They were more recuperated, and it was easier for them to come into the next meet training cycle fresh. It wasn't until I think it was either Brian, Carroll, I think it was when he started working with Stu McGill where they started and Brian's back was trashed. And then realizing that the amount of microfractures that are occurring because the bar's simply just on your back week after week, or potentially occurring because the bar's on your back week after week after week, and how long it takes for those to heal, and then removing it. So that became the bigger reason there was to let the spine just chill, and to remove anything from that spinal loading entirely and just work on tempo-based, bodybuilding-based type training and stuff like that. And there were no ill effects from doing that, just positive. So that's kind of where it came from. Now, the reason why I say a beginner's not going to be as long, beginner's not, they're not accumulating the same amount of damage while peaking for a meet than what the advanced person's going to. Plus the beginner, you can keep them away from technique for a little period of time, but they need to still work their skills all the time. So yes, there can be a break. It could be 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. But then it comes back in because they still are acquiring that skill set that's necessary to compete at higher levels. The advanced lifter has that skill set. I mean, the skill set may be impeded here and there because of injuries or certain muscles aren't doing what they're supposed to do or weak points and things like that. But the skill set's pretty much there. So you can remove, those movements and put them back in, and their skill set's going to come back really fast. So to incorporate a 1 week break, the 1 week break, I have no problem with the 1 week break. Say it's a deload. I have no problem with intelligently designed deloads being put into a training program. They should be put into the training program. Deload, it should be put in there. But that 1 week deload is not going to let your body, your spine, all your systems chill out as much as that longer period of time will. So in other words, what I'm saying, 1 week out of a month over a period of a year or 2 years, you're still going to have that accumulated spinal damage from the weight being placed on your back repetitively, training after training after training. That's not going to mitigate that. It's not going to give that chance for that to heal. So there are different reasons for the same thing. So what that 1 week will give you, though, is if you're overreaching and you're not able to recover, that 1 week deload or the 1 week off is going to provide enough time to let your body kind of super compensate back to where it needs to be to progress forward and to make the gains that you want. I wouldn't interchange the two. Keep it with that. So we got, if using tatesounds.com is adequate substitute for most online coaches, I need to know, are there only 3 spots left? There's always 3 spots left, no matter what. Okay. Back to the super chats. Anything on there?
One just came in.
Okay.
I went from 145 to 190 at 6'3", and I just finished the dirty bulk, and is just about to finish a 16-week training cycle. Thanks. Oh, it's just a thank you. Thanks for the info for the hypertrophy training and for the next training cycle.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So that was a super chat that you just had come in. Anything else on the Instagram, or just pick any question that's in the YouTube chat? Super chat or not super chat, doesn't make any difference.
Is it possible to build muscles without any of the power lifts, like no squat or deadlift? Bench press is okay. I fear disc issues, so I think he's got some back problems and he's worried about the squat and deadlift.
Yeah. I mean, other people have done it. So there's no rule that says that for you to make progress in strength and conditioning or bodybuilding or to build muscle that you have to squat, you have to deadlift, or you have to bench press. There's no rules for that. Are they great movements to be able to do? I believe so. But if you're just building muscle and that's what the objective is, there's a lot of people that have built really, really good physiques just on body weight movement. So there's nothing that in training, there's nothing you ever really have to do. There's certain principles that apply to training, specificity, progressive overload, the basics that go into programming that need to be adhered to, but there's no one perfect exercise for anything.
Okay, I got one more here. Which phase of your training career do you attribute with most of your injuries and body wear to? Some say that conjugate reduces mileage versus other forms of periodization. Do you agree, and by what margin?
I don't agree, because who's to say? I mean, statements like that are just so full of opinion and assumptions that I don't even know how to actually view it. So, okay, they're going to say conjugate is going to wear you down or beat you up less than progressive overload or less than, more high volume block type of approach. No. I mean, there's so I'll kind of back off of that because there's bad training. If you're going to go in and not have any type of phasic nature to the training that you're doing, it's probably not going to be optimal. If you don't have a phasic nature and you're just going in and training, you're going balls out 100% every single training session. Yeah, that's probably going to accumulate more fatigue and more issues than would otherwise be seen. Maybe, there's I want to say like, show me the proof, but there's so many other facets with this that when you look at it just on sets and reps, say total volume, just sets and reps, you would think the more mileage, sets and reps on a joint, the more wear and tear you would see with that joint. Or the heavier that joint's loaded, the more wear and tear you're going to generally see. In the training space, where this is where things get cloudy when you start talking about injuries, because injuries, people like to stick a pin on an injury and say, this injury is caused because you squatted wide. Pin. This injury is caused because you bend over too much when you squat. Pin. So that's the amateur diagnosis of what the causation is of a certain injury, where the training takes how many hours per week? So now we'll go with the lower back stuff because people can relate to this, because McGill's been pushing it, his practitioner's been pushing it, Brian's been pushing it forever. Most back injuries probably aren't occurring because of things people are doing in the gym. They're occurring because of all the shit that they're doing outside of the gym. All right. Does the gym play a role one way or another? Yes, it does. How big that role plays, that's to be debated. Nobody really knows that. So we can go the same thing and say, okay, so if it's a hip injury, if it's a knee injury, if it's a nerve damage, if it's whatever it's going to be, is it somewhat attributed to the training? Yes, of course, it's somewhat attributed to the training, but why? Because now if there was an acute injury, a fucked up acute injury, like a side spotter on the squat decided to push the bar 5 inches forward on one side and the other side. And so you have an acute injury because of a misplaced force on a barbell. That would be, let's say it's not an acute, it's an accident, right? So remove those. And then you're dealing with things that can be or not be attributed to overuse. Well, what plays into overuse? Because the assumption that gets made a lot of the times is this is just the squat, or this is just the deadlift, or this is just a tricep extension, or this is just an overhead press, or this is just this. Where that assumption, in my opinion, is bullshit. Because if that assumption was true, then wouldn't it also be true that everybody that did an overhead press would have fucked up shoulders? Or if the assumption was also true, everybody that squatted ass to grass or squatted close stance would have bad knees or sore knees, whatever you want to call it. So why is that not true? If that's the actual pin that creates the issue, because there's other factors that are involved. So the other factors that are involved, could be somebody's anatomy, definitely could be somebody's anatomy. I think that's being overemphasized as well. It could be somebody's technique. Of course it could be that. It could also be that they're not sleeping for shit. They're not eating for shit. They're not recovering. We're talking about injuries, overuse injuries, which basically stem from accumulation of overreaching, accumulated fatigue, and the ability not to recover. When those things happen, then the system is going to start to break down. Where it's going to break down, it could be at its weakest point, it could be at wherever that anatomical disadvantage position is going to be. It could be a lot of different things. Where again, going back to what I was talking about earlier in this podcast, when it comes to a mini max, everybody wants to know what exercise that they should do to overcome the sticking point. They don't want to look at the global aspects of all training, the physical, technical, mental, and recovery abilities. Same thing when it comes to injury. Everybody wants to pinpoint the injury or the injury history on this style of training, that style of training, this exercise or that exercise, but they don't want to look at the global aspect of what's the health history of the individual, what's the family history of that individual, what is the how are they recovering? Were they pushing it, and did they know they were pushing it? Because most of the time they know, because there's a balance, especially when you're more intermediate to advanced lifter. There's a balance that you walk when you're trying to accommodate the fatigue and to recover from the fatigue. It becomes a fine line, because there's things that you want to get done that you feel that you have to get done to be able to move forward. And sometimes those things are going to come up on the schedule a little bit earlier than what it really should. So you have to decide, do you say fuck it and do it, or you push it back? So there's that balance that has to be played. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes it's just kind of indifferent. But that balance that has to be played with all this, the ability to recover, is always ends up becoming part of a simplified sales conversation. Do this exercise, you won't screw your shoulders up. Do this exercise, spin this thing, shake this thing, or do this, you'll never have shoulder problems again. So we live in an industry that focuses on shit just like that to be able to monetize, to get clicks, get views, or however you want to monetize either way, because they know that's the addictive components that meatheads want to fall towards. They want to fall towards what will get me there faster, right? This will get me there faster than this. And that's not a bad mindset to have. I mean, by all means, you want to be able to progress, as fast as you can possibly progress. But, as lifters and people studying training and coaching and so forth, you can never lose sight of the global aspects that encompass what it takes for that athlete to move forward, because this doesn't happen in a vacuum of just one movement. So now to go back and answer the question, where do I think I accumulated most of my joint issues and damage? I don't know if anybody can definitively say with certainty, unless I had imaging of every joint since the point I was 13 years old or 12 years old and did my first meet until then. So I can only kind of guess. And I would say that there was a point and I've spoke about this in past podcasts, there was a point in my competitive career to where my perception shifted radically. So it shifted from looking at where I wanted to be in the next 2 or 3 years to this could be my last year. And with that shift, and it's a slight shift, but it's a huge shift in outcome. It's a slight shift in perspective, but a huge shift in outcome. Because when you're planning out close to a quadrennial or a couple years of training, you can strategize time off, rest. I wouldn't say when a bench meet may be more appropriate than a full meet, which is kind of a way of deloading. So you strategize that a little bit differently when the plan is longer. When that became, this may be the last year I have, then all that shit kind of got thrown out the window. Then it was, okay, what's going to be the focal meat of this year? And then is there going to be another meet at all that's going to be in the year? Or are we just going to say, fuck it, and spend that time working on the weak points to be able to accomplish what needs to accomplish and whatever that next meet was going to be? And it was the situation that competitively I was in was a little different than what the guys are now, kind of to a degree, where the worlds where I wanted to be in the world. So the only way you can get in the worlds, you have to qualify through the nationals. So you got to go to the nationals, qualify for the worlds, be able to do that. Now, if you bomb out of the nationals, which I did, so you bomb out of the nationals, then you're not going to go to the worlds that year. Your next meet is going to be that next nationals again. And that may not necessarily be having to go into that 100%, but just going in that enough to be able to qualify for the worlds. Well, for me, that had to be going into it at 100% because that's what it was going to take to be able to qualify for there. So that sometimes would shift, a 12-month thinking phase into being an 18-month thinking phase, because there's this whole qualification thing. Then if you fuck that up, then you're right back to that whole situation again. Anyhow, to go back to answering the question, that's when that shift in perspective became more of there's times in training, and a lot of people listening to this will understand what I'm talking about, that I call it's like a fuck it moment. So it could be your max effort work, it could even be speed, hell, it could be supplemental work. You're doing whatever you need to do, and something just doesn't feel exactly the way that you would like it to feel, but it also doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel like something's broke or something's that fucked up. It just doesn't feel right. So you question yourself. So you stop for a moment. You think, is this going to be the smartest thing to do currently right now to be able to move forward? Where when my mindset was more in that longer term, 3-year type thing, it's like, nah, man, I'll just shut it down. when it shifted to this could be the last one, it shifted to fuck it, we're doing it now, which two things happened. It pushed my threshold to the cliff. You know, I always talk about a lot of times you walk on the side of a cliff. Sometimes you're going to slip. You don't ever want to fall because then you're dead, but sometimes you're going to slip. You know, so there's certain times where you want to be close to the cliff. There's other times you want to be super far away from that cliff. That put me closer to the cliff most of the time. And with that shift in perspective, at that point, I didn't care if I fell the fuck off the cliff. If I fall off and this is over and this blows this out for good and I can never compete again, fuck it, I'm on borrowed time anyhow. Who cares? So that shift in perspective is when I started to train on the edge, which then, yes, it led to greater strength increases. I'm not going to lie about that. It led to much greater strength increases, but it also led to a much more strategic and harder balance of trying to accommodate the fatigue that was associated with that, to where, you know, Melsif, rest in peace, helped me tremendously with different recovery and recuperation protocols to be able to put into the training, to be able to kind of mitigate some of that kind of stuff. Well, I was able to mitigate it to move the training forward, but I don't know, to answer the question directly, if I was able to mitigate it to lessen joint damage that could have potentially been occurring at that time. I'm not going to ever say definitively one way or another, but I'm not going to be ignorant and say that didn't have something to do with that. So that was definitely, it was during my later years, but keep in mind also, during those later years, I was also okay with, if this is the last lift I do, so be it, fuck it. And that's a bad attitude to have if you're trying to rise up through a sport, because that's going to put you out of the sport really, really fast. If you're trying to extend the sport, then I understand that.
Looks like we have one more. What aspects of your own technique did Louis Simmons help you clean up the most? I liked his squat brace advice for you. Show me how fat you are.
The squat was a big one because I wasn't at Westside at the time. I was still in college competing, and it was right after, interesting meet with this because it was Toledo Open, I believe it was. And it was the first meet after a short bodybuilding gig that I did a few years. And I went from 242 to 275. And so I put on a lot of muscle in the 3 years that I was bodybuilding. And it was the first time that Louis saw me back on the platform. Keep in mind that, you know, Louis was helping me in the warm-up room when I was a 13-year-old kid. So I don't want to say that we had a relationship back then. It was just more like one guy helping another kid in a warm-up room and not really knowing. But after a while, you kind of begin to recognize the same people that are in the same meets, and because you're doing them so often. So he recognized that I was back on the platform after not being there for a while, because he came up to me at the beginning of the meet and said, holy cow, you put some muscle on. What have you been doing? And it's this bodybuilding gig and this kind of shit. And that's when he started kind of putting his thoughts in my head of, you need to come to Westside, you need to, you know, drive up on the weekends, stuff like that. So it was during my squat, I don't know what attempt it was, but one of them was just a fucking wreck. And then the second one, he was back spotting me for some reason and then told me to, I don't know the exact words, it was push my belly against the belt or it was something, but it clicked. And then I braced is what I did. And holy cow, my squat never felt like that before in my life. At that point, I was sold. I'm like, whoever this dude is, I need to start driving to learn from him. And And the moral of the story was that same meet, I ended up totaling, oh man, like 10 pounds less than I did at 242. So needless to say, I wasn't really happy in the warm-up room when Louis came up to me. I told him, I don't understand this. I don't get this. My whole training cycle was shit compared to what it was before. Everything felt heavy as fuck. I'm weight class heavier. I got way more muscle. I don't understand what the hell's going on. You know, what I can do for 5 reps is fucking more than I did in the meet. You know, I'm so freaking confused from this. And he's trying to explain all this to me from that. So I don't know if that doesn't answer the question that he asked, but that answers the question about that technical aspect. Now, where the biggest technique changes that I think that we had to make were with my bench, because the meet I did after 3 meets, shortly before I came to Westside, I tore my pec off. So it was the tendon came out of the humerus and it had to be screwed back in. So that was, as soon as I graduated from college, I moved to Columbus. Within the first week, I had the surgery to put the tendon back in the pec. And then so my first local trips to Westside, because I was coming up on weekends, I was in a sling. And then after coming back from that, I had a lot of problems with repetitive scar tissue popping and tearing in that pec, where at first you just, the natural thought is, oh shit, I just tore the pec again. And then, after seeing the doctors several times that I did this, I just kind of realized, okay, this is going to suck, because some of it was restraining the muscle, but most of it was just scar tissue getting torn away because it wasn't laying it. Anyhow, once all that kind of got worked out to a degree, there were certain positions I was not able to lock out in because of the way the pec healed, and the tendon was fixed, but the muscle still has, a giant hole in it. So long story short, we probably spent an hour one Tuesday, because we had extra workouts that we'd sometimes do on Tuesdays and Thursdays, of feeder workouts or recovery workouts, whatever you want to call them, just working on my bench groove or bench technique, bar path per se, to try to take out as much pec as we possibly could. So all I remember is the goal was, we just want to make this a shoulder rotation and tricep extension and remove everything else that we can possibly remove from it, and put all the load on the triceps to be able to do that. Once we figured this out, I should say he figured this out, because it's me, as I'm just the guinea pig laying there, like, where do you feel it? Where do you feel it? Where do you feel it? No, I don't feel it. Then it ended up being a thumbless grip, wide thumbless grip, tucking hard, pushing in a straight line, bringing it a little bit lower, all these other factors. That was the biggest shift in any of the lifts. Now, my squat had to go from a close to a wide stance, and that took a little bit of time, but that wasn't anywhere near. That actually felt, once the strength picked back up to where it was supposed to be, that was 100% the right move, because I was way stronger and it shortened my bar path tremendously, being able to do that. That was the right move. This other one was a move just to try to get the stress off a muscle that was probably never going to work right again. And there's probably nerve issues and other things that are associated with that, and almost creating a brand new exercise out of an exercise that would still be a legal lift. That was the biggest technique change by far. And it worked. I mean, it helped my bench. I'm just talking in circles. Is there any other super chats that came in?
Nope, I'm not seeing anything else.
All right. Go through one scroll here. Let me look at the Instagram again. 3 weeks size.
Super chat just came in. Any suggestions for hip and foot stability to mitigate knee pain? Knees hurting even in body weight squats, not trusting body after a minor knee injury.
No. I mean, let me look at the question here. Things like that are just weird because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physical therapist. So there's all those type of things. It's for hip and foot stability to mitigate knee pain. You know, what goes through my head immediately is, why do you think it's your hip and foot stability that needs to mitigate the knee pain? Do you think that because you saw a meme on Instagram or something on TikTok that says that that's what's causing your knee pain? Because how do you know that there's not something that's torn in your knee? How do you know this is just not an acute knee problem? So it could be what you're saying, but this kind of goes into some of the things I was talking about earlier. Is you're looking for, I don't want to say you're looking for solutions. The internet's a weird place. You know, it's full of all kinds of great information that can help you move forward. It's also full of a lot of potential, it's also full of a lot of preordained excuses as to why something hurts or can't get better. So there's certain accounts that you can go look at and just scroll through the count. And if it's therapy-based, physical therapy-based, movement-based, whatever it's going to be, then every pain and every issue that you have is 100% because of something upstream or downstream, but it's never because of the actual place that hurts. That's if you look there. Now, if you go look at orthopedics, you know, or that type of thing, then it's always going to stem from the place that hurts. If you look at meatheads that, like myself, that just love strength and getting stronger, then obviously the answer is going to be your knee wouldn't hurt if your legs were fucking stronger. You know, so you got to weed through all the different bias to kind of figure out what's going on, because this also goes not just to the meme culture. I don't even know what to call it. It doesn't just go with that, but it goes to whom you're going to seek to be able to help with the problem. So if you go to somebody to help you with the knee problem that doesn't look at that knee joint from a global perspective, what's upstream, what's downstream, and what's going on in the knee, then the information could be misled and not adequate for what you need. So that's why I don't know if that's what your issue is. So I don't know what exercises to be able to put in there. I don't know when the knee hurts, when the knee doesn't hurt. There's just too many other variables that are associated with that. So what I can say, if my knee hurt and I had no idea why the fuck it hurt, so it just started hurting. So I squat one day, doesn't bother me during that squat workout, but then the next day it's like, ooh, fuck, what's going on with my knee? Where's it hurt? What would I do? Well, the first thing that I would do is try to find movements that I can do for that joint that doesn't hurt. And then just start pushing and moving blood through there one way or another, however I could. It could be a movement just as simple as a seated calf raise, because that may be the only thing that doesn't hurt. Maybe, and where I don't like the sheer force of the knee with a leg extension, but maybe it's a partial leg extension just to start putting blood in there. Maybe it's just digging out, you know, the tendons the knee and the quad, or maybe the quad's tight. Maybe if I roll on a foam roller, I'm going to find out my IT band makes me want to scream, or my calves are super tight. So I'm going to start trying to figure out what hurts, what doesn't hurt, what movements hurt, what movements don't hurt, what movements am I going to have to avoid, and just kind of progress moving that way and avoid the movements that hurt it until those movements no longer hurt it. So it could be avoiding a squat, for instance, until I can put that back in. Now, if what you're saying is every movement that you do with the knee hurts, everything from getting out of bed, sitting on a toilet, so it's disrupting your life, then I would say get some imaging done and seek a professional that could be able to help you to fine tune exactly what's going on with that, so you can make a informed decision moving forward. Okay, we got another one I think just came in. I can't.
Yep, Adam Burt. At 85% plus on squat, I feel my hips are rising faster than the bar, and I end up in a good morning to finish. Any suggestion for likely weakness or a way forward?
At 85% plus, your hips are kicking out before. Okay. The 85 plus helps, right? Because if it's not happening at the 80%, it kind of helps. What I would want to know is it starting to happen at the 80% and the 75% and the 70% range, but you just can't really see it yet. So you can start to see that pattern being a little disrupted in the lower percent ranges, because then it could be, more technical. But once you start working up into that 85, 90% range, you can start looking at things that could be physical type issues, where I've said it hundreds of times, I'll look at a lift as a physical, mental, or technical problem. When I do the train your asses off weekends that I do out here, I'll work all the technical stuff with the lifters for, it's a couple hours, let's say 2.5 hours for 5 lifters to work all that stuff out. Once all that's worked out, then I do have them start to work up to see exactly what you're talking about. Not so much your issue, but to see what issues are going to happen as the weight gets heavier. What's going to break down, what technically is going to break down, and why is it going to break down? So is it breaking down because of lower back strength, ab strength, hip strength, upper back strength, and why is that breaking down? So what you're seeing is, kind of like a butt wink, or what hip shift, whatever you want to call it. What I wonder when that happens is what happens first. Is it the inability? So if I was to look at your videos, I would want to see all your warm-ups, so look through a lot of your other squats at lighter percentages and watch how you come out of the bottom. And when you come out of the bottom, pay really close attention to what the bar path is doing immediately after the reversal. So is your upper back, chest, sternum, whatever you want to call it, is that coming up first on the lighter stuff, and then the hips kind of follow? Or are the hips and the chest kind of coming up at the same time? Or is the hip coming up then that? So what you want to try to pay attention to as you're looking through the reps before and then this rep that you're talking about is find what's different exactly. And then just, if you're using your phone, just kind of slow-mo scroll through where that difference is and see if it looks like, and this is really hard to do without seeing the person themselves, but what you want to do is you want to see, does this look like this is being created because there's a lack of a stable brace coming out of the bottom? So when you come out of the bottom, you're not firing through, a rock you're firing through a balloon. So if you took your torso out, put a rock in, it's going to transfer of force is going to go straight through there. If you put a balloon in there, transfer of force is going to, smush around in the balloons or marshmallow or whatever you want to put in there. So is it that's not able to stay tight, or maybe you just know that it's not able to stay tight? And then if it's not staying tight and there is a little bit of a cave forward, is that due to your breathing coming out of the hole? Is it due to a Valsalva maneuver that you're doing out of the bottom? What also could be creating this problem with that? So it could be, the obliques, the abdominal wall not being able to keep. And when I say that, when I'm talking about brace, it is 360 degrees. But when I look at things like this, I want to see out of that 360 degree torso, what is the weaker area? Is it the erectors that are the problem here? Is it the abdominal wall? Is the obliques? What is it? Or is it not even part of the problem? Is the problem because the upper back isn't strong enough to be able to keep the shoulders and elbows in the position they need to be in coming out of the bottom? Which that could then be shoulder mobility. It could be lat strength, to be able to keep that tight. It could be the static strength to be able to keep the upper back tight for that desired period of time. So it can be a lot of different things. It could be head position. There can be a lot of different things that are going on. But I think if you look at the successful repetitions, then you look at this repetition and then look carefully at that segment of that lift, find out what's different, and then make it so it's the same as the others, and you're going to be on the right track. I just saw another one come in, but this is weird. It's like ID.
Yeah, I think their screen name is just TD, but it's best way to figure out if your hamstrings are weak, tight, or both. Dealing with lower back pain and pain just above the left hip, not on joint, on DE lower day.
The part of this that threw out there that made me pivot was dealing with lower back issues, and then thinking that this can be, and it can be, because the hamstring tightness, where it could be a lot of different things, especially when you're dealing with the lower back from there. So it's going to become a process of elimination. So what I'm hesitant to say is to stretch your hamstrings, to loosen your hamstrings, to train your start training your hamstrings with greater full range of motion, to try to exceed the range of motion that your hamstrings currently have, so they're not as tight. Why I'm hesitant to say that is those hamstrings could be tight and kind of shutting down for a reason that's actually keeping your spine safe. So if we take away the tightness that can potentially be protecting the spine, then we're going to take something and make it worse without knowing exactly what's going on with that. So with this one, I'm kind of a little bit at a loss, because it kind of gets out of my wheelhouse a little bit when you're dealing with lower back type issues, where Sam's a good one to address that too. Brian Carroll's a good one to address that too. Stu McGill, all those type of things. So what I can say though, I can back out of it and say, because this is normally, and I'm sure if Sam were here and Brian and anybody else that works with lower back issues all the time, this is usually the solution, is to look at how you're treating your lower back throughout the rest of the day. And you'd be so surprised at how many times this ends up being the biggest culprit. And the reason it ends up being the biggest culprit is for the same reason that I probably would have blown off the same advice 15, 20 years ago, is it's too easy to be the reason. Like how you get out of bed cannot possibly be the reason. But it's not so much how you get out of bed. It's how you get out of the bed. It's how you get out of a chair. It's how you move. It's how you get up. It's how you sit down. How many times a day you do all that? You know, are you moving? Are you walking? Are you doing all these other things, you know, to be able to ensure that spine health? And then when you start adding all those things up, it's a lot. And at that point, when you start adding all those things up, there also becomes a factor of there's a reason why nobody does these things and puts focus on these things, because they are so easy to do that they get overlooked and they get forgotten about. And it's like, oh, fuck, I didn't even think about it. You know, how are you going to set an alarm on your phone to tell you to get off every time you stand up, to stand up with, you know, better technique, better form? So I think what happens in most cases is people will just, unfortunately, they'll just wait until the problem gets so bad that they have no choice but to focus on those things. And if you have low back issues now, think about, so you know there's a spectrum on how that ranges. So it can be mild discomfort to back hurts like a bitch, you can't walk, you got to crawl, you know, wherever you're going to go. So think about when your back's been lit up on you over, on a scale of 1 to 10, over like a 6 or a 7. Think about what you do. If you say you have to bend over to pick something up with the floor and your back's at that 6 or 7, how are you going to bend over and pick it up? If your back's at that 6 or 7, how are you going to get out of bed? How are you going to get out of the chair? If it's at that 6 or 7, normally what you're going to do is you're going to position yourself a little bit better. You're going to flex your stomach. You're going to flex your abdominal wall. You're going to brace yourself a little bit better. You're going to use your hands to help you get up. Just live your life like your back's at a 6 or a 7 all the time. And then it will be better during those other times. All right. Any other ones?
No more super chats, but I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
This Natural Warrior says, only have 2 days per week to train. How to program it? I think he's just asking how to fit everything into 2 days.
There's a lot of ways you can do that. I like the way the question was proposed, or the way the question was asked, because he's looking for solutions. He's not saying, I want to do this 4-day program. How do I squeeze it into 2? You know, it's like, so he's working with what he has, which is the biggest part of all this. So from there, I guess what I would do is look into what are your overreaching objectives here? What are the goals from your training outside of just getting stronger and getting bigger? What are the solid goals in there? And then from whatever that is, you can determine, you have some options here. So you can do a total body workout twice in 1 week, which is a big session, or it can be a big session. It depends also on how strong you are. So when you're going to combine everything into 2 days and you're intermediate to advanced strength, then it's going to be a little bit more complicated, because you're only going to have so much time as well. And if it takes you a half hour to 40 minutes to warm up your squat, because you're going to be squatting 680 or 700 or whatever it is, then that can be a compounding issue that's going to separate it. So the options that I'm going to throw out there, just with the little context that I have, is if it's just general strength that you're talking about, I would probably do total body workout twice a week, separate it by a few days, say Monday, Thursday, but go with whatever you can go with. You don't want to do them back to back, that's for sure. But if your schedule only calls for being able to train twice a week and they have to be back to back, then go upper body, lower body. There's no right or wrong split, as long as you're just splitting it up a little bit. And then once you have that situated, find something. You won't be able to do it with every exercise, nor do I suggest you do it with every exercise, but find a few exercises to kind of use as anchors that you're going to use to try to progress at getting better at doing them. So it could be getting better at being stronger at them, doing more reps at them, however you want to progress it forward. But there has to be some type of progression that's going to be built into that. And then just go from there. You know, just be consistent with that. The the biggest problem with the once a week or twice a week training scenarios is when you miss, because then it becomes twice a month instead of 4 times a month or however it is. And I've known people that I've had times in my life to where I could only train once a week. And oddly enough, I found that if it was only one body part, and I'm not going to say this is going to ring true with everybody, if it was only one body part and I made that body part lats or back, full back, I was able to maintain strength on everything else much better than even if it was just legs, which I don't quite understand, but that's kind of how it played out with me. So I know if I ever get to a position where it has to drop down to just once a week for an extended period of time, that's going to be my go-to again. I saw some other ones popped up.
Yeah. How important is muscle pump for you? I rarely get pumps, but will reach failure.
I'm going to say that in general, it's not as important as people make it out to be. For me personally, or if it's somebody that I'm helping in any capacity, then I do think it's important. So I kind of go against the I don't even know if it's the grain, because there are probably a lot of people that are going to agree with what I'm going to say. Do I think it's important in regards to becoming stronger from a adaptation process? Not so much. So if anything has to go, if it's a strength athlete, then this would probably be like one of the least important things, where the reason I like to have it in people's programs is I'm one that I believe in this mind-muscle connection thing. I also think that somebody that's any type of strength athlete should be able to possess, have, or be working on the ability to contract every muscle that they have just sitting in a chair. So if I said flex your bicep, flex your chest, flex your shoulders, you should be able to flex everything. So does that mean that you're going to be stronger, bigger? I don't know. But what that tells me is if you get into a situation in your training that you need to start putting more focus on, say, your triceps or your rear delts, you want to be able to feel what that muscle feels like when it's working and doing what it's supposed to do. Not just in a concentric contraction, but eccentric and isometric as well. So I would like the person to be able to know the difference between what their rear delts feel like if they're burning compared to what their traps feel like if they're burning, and be able to kind of separate the two of those for later down the line if we have to specialize on one or the other, because it ends up being part of a sticking point that's associated with one of the lifts. I want to be able to say, okay, we need to increase the work or the volume that you're doing for your rear delts. They're going to know what that feels like. Now, part of that is the ability to be able to drive a pump into the muscle, because that just enhances the ability of this is what this muscle feels like when it's contracted, when it's full. So I don't want that to be confused with this is going to mean you're going to have a stronger bench and all this other stuff. It doesn't. It works in unison with it. And I think it's a skill that can pay off down the line with the strength aspect that I'm talking about. Now, from a blood aspect, just putting the fluid in there, that's part of the recovery process, the way that my brain works. So if, say we're speaking about feeder workouts, recovery workouts, say somebody's heavy bench day or pressing day is on Sunday, but every Monday their shoulders and triceps just are wrecked. And it's not the muscle soreness wreck that I'm talking about. It's more just like the slight joint stiffness, and it just feels like you just got beat by a bat, throughout that area that was trained. Going in that following day, keeping the weight light and just trying to get a pump in there, just pumping blood in there, can help that recovery process as well. Now, if the person doesn't know or hasn't developed that ability to be able to know when the muscle's pumped or there's blood in there, then they're going to also, to a degree, lose the ability to know when that feeder or that recovery workout is enough. Because general recommendations I'd make on that is you want to train it right until the point where it feels a little pumped and just stop. What if the person has no idea what pumped means and they don't have that ability? Then you lose a tool of auto-regulation that I think the athlete should have in their toolbox for a multitude of reasons. So there's that.
I'm not seeing any more. Do you want to go ahead and close this out, or you want to?
Yeah, we can shut it down. This is the last one of the year. So The next time will be a new year. So everybody have a happy, safe New Year's. If you haven't had a chance, check out the limited edition items that we have on the site. It's on Hero 3, which I guess I got to speak like layman's language. The banners on our front site are called Heroes. There's 4 of them. Hero 3 is the limited edition item. So there's this hood. There's a Zero Fear hood. There's a Train Like a Motherfucker hood or shirt. The way that we set up the limited edition items were to support the Table Talk podcast, to be completely honest with you guys. And if you've listened to the Table Podcast, look at this, the Table Talk. How did this just do this? The Table Talk podcast. It shouldn't even be a tongue twister, should it? Table Talk.
Doesn't seem like
No. If you've been listening to this, then you've heard me bitch over the past year and a half about trying to find ways to make this so it was fiscally responsible. Well, let me use that as far as the terminology. And we found a way to do that. And the way that we're doing that is through the limited edition item drops that we put out there. And I want to thank you guys that have been supporting the podcast through the super chats as well. Because one of the big objectives I had for this year for our content was to get it to a place to where, and I don't want to say content was a liability, because that's the wrong word to be able to use, because it's not, because it helps people. In no way ever is helping people going to be a liability. But from the financial perspective, it was becoming a bit of a strain. So we had to find ways to get the content to be able to break even, I suppose. I mean, we're not looking to, make shit ton of money on the content, but at the same time, we got to be able to pay for the resources it takes to produce the content. Because I've had to take in the last couple of years, as one of the owners of the company, I'm kind of like vested in the company, and I know the inner workings of the company. At least I should, just a little bit. There's a big part of the strategy was the one thing that I'm not going to compromise on is going to be the content, but how we do the content had to change a little bit to be able to allow us to keep bringing you guys the content that we do, but not only bring you guys the content that we do, but to expand upon the media staff in the content that we put out to bring you even more and better content going into 2022. So not only were we able to hit that break-even point, which was a huge objective for me going into this year, but we've been able to do it to a point that we're going to be bringing a couple more people in January to be able to help with the content, which is going to allow us to bring out even more content and better content for you guys. As long as you guys keep supporting us through the limited edition apparel, the super chats, and the other things that we put out that we mark specifically for the content, I am going to keep giving you guys more and more and more content at an unprecedented level, because it's never been in my DNA to actually profit and monetize on the content. And I got 23 years of proof to show that that's 100% true in the case. So as long as you guys support us, we're going to keep bringing you some awesome shit. Please, keep your recommendations coming through the community post, the super chats, and even the comments that you put on the YouTube. If you're watching this on the Instagram, let us know what you guys are looking for. What do you want us to bring to you? Because ultimately that's what we're here for. We're here to service you guys and to help you with your training questions. Let us know what we can do to help you moving forward. And we're just going to keep rolling this shit out. And thank you guys for what you do.